backyard, and it's one of the few places that are probably warmer than it is here in Vegas. So this temperature means nothing to me, except it's kind of cold inside here. Next slide. So I got my first skull saw, a hawk, in 1990. My husband went to a trade show and thought, well, this would be a good thing to make presents for the grandchildren. So he bought a scroll saw. He didn't like it. It broke blades. It didn't cut straight. So he got a bandsaw. I got the scroll saw. I started making things and discovered I was creative. I liked it. We joined the wood club in Phoenix. Next slide. One of the things we did was make children, because our club in Phoenix, wherever this went, gives away toys to charities for children. So we made toys. Next slide. A lot of what we made were cars and trucks, because he could do that on the bandsaw. That left me free to do scroll saw stuff. Next slide. So I did things like this for children. Guess what? My children and grandchildren loved it, and so did the people I was working with at Motorola. And soon they were buying all sorts of stuff from me, or liking things. Next slide. In 1998, I got colon cancer and went into survival mode for about 9 months, during which time I spent most of it creating and developing, but not actually cutting much stuff. When I did get back to work, it was near Christmas, and my colleagues wanted me to make them puzzles. So I started making children's puzzles. These puzzles are pictures that were glued on plywood, 1/4-inch plywood, and then cut up. The problem with cutting plywood, as well as cutting pictures that somebody else makes, is there's a copyright problem. And plywood tends to chip when you cut it in small pieces. And, of course, there's always the copyright problem. Next slide. So I decided to design my own. So this is a geometric design based on a basket, a Navajo basket pattern. And in order to make the smaller pieces that this one required, I did it on MDF, which is medium density fiberboard, which didn't chip as well and seemed to hold the smaller pieces. In addition to that, I used a small air carver in order to get these lines here, so that the paint wouldn't bleed from section to section. Next slide. And this is another one I did the same thing. Although the edges are cut and glued together, the small pieces have edge lines on them that I did with a small carver. Next slide. The carver leaves lines like this right through the edge of the puzzle, but not very deep into it. And that keeps the paint from spreading all over the place. Next slide. In addition to that, and along the same lines, I started to make hardwood puzzles. This puzzle is made out of maple, and I carved all the turquoise lines in there. I filled it with real turquoise, and then cut the pieces, and they were all from the inside of this bowl, which I also carved out so that you could see the layers. So each layer is different. Next. This is another one I did in the hardwood theme with turquoise running through the river. It has 5 layers of different kinds of hardwood. So it's kind of a tough puzzle. Next. With all the puzzles I was doing and still working, we decided we'd start doing arts and crafts booths. So this is a typical arts and crafts booth that we were working on. And you You can see at this point most of the puzzles are my own because my husband by this time had gotten very sick and mostly stayed home. So I was busy trying to put out a booth and sell and work. But it seems in a whole booth of all these creative puzzles, what people wanted were these little ones down here. They're called matchbox puzzles. Next. These are matchbox puzzles. They're 15-piece puzzles that fit in a matchbox. The people just went gaga over. And so I spent more time making jigsaw puzzles, tiny jigsaw puzzles, than creating. And that wasn't what I wanted to do. It made a little money. People liked them. But there's no creativity. And I was just making too many of them. Next. So then my husband passed away, and I decided, well, these booths are getting too hard to do. So what I'll do is I'll create a website. So I created the Wooden Wizard website. This is a little intarsia piece I made to show off my website. The problem was it was too hard to maintain, took too much effort, and so I eventually just let it die on its own. So after he passed away, I decided it was time for some redesigning and reinventing myself. So I moved to Surprise, Arizona from Phoenix. And I started redesigning. Next. So my idea was to create a round puzzle. So I cut pieces and I bent them. How many pieces do I need to bend a circle? What kind of diameter do I need? What sizes are there? So I kept counting numbers and making pieces and trying to make them fit to one another. But my hardest problem was to be able to make a complete circle, to have one end connect to the other. Next. Well, I finally figured it out. So I started making puzzles using circles. So this puzzle, each area has 2 round circle puzzles in it, as well as all the other puzzle pieces. Because these were just kind of trial things that I did for still working on figuring out how to do round shapes. Next. And this is another one. The outside ring is all solid, but the inside ring of the puzzle people are all puzzle pieces holding in this other puzzle. And I thought it was a pretty cool geometric design. Next. And this is another one that I did. It has black pieces around in 2 different areas because I was finally figuring out how to do concentric circles. Next. What brought me to the 100,000 piece puzzle was this guy. This is Dale Evans. Dale Evans is from London. He had, before me, the world's record in jigsaw puzzle pieces. He did a montage of the Queen. It is 19 feet by 8 feet and has 40,000 pieces in it. Well, guess what happened to his puzzle? Next. It fell down and made a big mess. He eventually got it cleaned up, but still I was inspired. So what I had to do was figure out how to solve this problem. All I needed to do to get the world record was to make a smaller puzzle that was portable, something that didn't have glued pictures on it, and something that wouldn't fall apart. So I figured I had quite a challenge on my hand. So away I went. Next. This was my first attempt at a smaller, rounder puzzle. I entered this in the San Diego County Fair, which is a big woodworking fair, in 2014. Their thing this year was the 60s, so everything was done in a 60s theme. I didn't win anything at San Diego, but the second prize was from the local woodworking club. Next. This This is the same puzzle unwound, and you can see all the 60 stuff, and the pieces are bigger. And the center diameter is now 7 inches, which is as tight as I could make it. Next, this is the same puzzle stretched out, so you can see it's just pretty short. It's 6,000 pieces and 24 feet. Next.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, now that I did that, let's try something bigger. So this is a 50,000 piece puzzle. It's 66.5 feet long and is done in a series of pictures, but still not glued on, painted. And this won second place in one show and first place in another show, which I thought was really nice. And so next, and this is the same puzzle stretched out. You can see I taped the back so that it wouldn't fall apart. That was my solution to falling over. But what I couldn't do was this line right here is a solid piece between this piece and this piece. And I couldn't figure out how to make that go together without having all those solid bars in there. So that was my next challenge. However, with the 50,000 piece puzzle, next, it still was enough to get me, it wasn't a world record at that point, but the Scroll Saw magazine put me in there, and that was nice. Guinness wouldn't let me have the world record because I didn't film it. That was their justification. They didn't have anybody look at it, I didn't film it, so therefore it must not be real. So I moved on. Next. So this is the problem I was saying that I had with a black bar across the center of the puzzle, this line right here. And I still had to figure out how to solve that. Next. This is just a close-up of that line where you can see this is actually glued. The puzzle pieces are here and here, but nothing crosses this line. This line is solid, and I had to solve that. So, unfortunately, I got colon cancer again, so that left me another 6 months of trying to figure things out and reinvent myself and fix this problem. So next, so I got me a new scroll saw from Seyco with a big, long 24-foot-inch table. And next, I used, on this big puzzle, I used 74 dozen piece of scroll saw blades of a number 30, which are very tiny, probably the size, they're 0.08 of an inch thick. So it took me 888 pieces, 888 scroll saw blades to make the large puzzle. So I figured out some things next. This is all the scroll saw blades that I used. I just threw them in a can and gathered them up. Some of them broke, some of them bent, but mostly they just wore out. Next, I gathered all my supplies. So in order to make a 100,000 piece puzzle, these are the things that I used to create the puzzle, as well as some Photoshop stuff. Next, so this is how to make a 100,000 piece puzzle. If anybody wants to do it, I will help you. I do not intend to make a larger puzzle than this. I do not intend to add on to the one I've got. So I took 2 pieces of 12 by 12 MDF wood with a nice light colored maple veneer on it. Cut professionally at the woodworker's source so that these lines in the middle, these joints, are absolutely perfectly square. And that was important when I started putting it together. Next. So I set the 2 pieces together and I started to draw a pattern. Mostly just squares and triangles and circles and geometric shapes. Next. And I painted them so that they would cover the center line. Next. And then this is 2 squares painted and outlined and ready to go. Next. This is for each 1 foot pattern, I covered it with green frog tape and then put on a cutting pattern. These squares are 5/16 by 5/16, and the little X's show me where to cut. Next. So I did that for 2 pieces, because these are the next 2 pieces I was going to cut together. Next. Then I cut off an edge off of each one, 5 pieces, with a skull saw design. Next, took those 2 pieces, glued them together, nice and tight. You can see the glue line. Next, after a day of drying, this is what it looks like on the inside, from the top and from the bottom. Next, then I cleaned it up, so now it looks like this. And you can hardly see that there's a joint running right through the middle of this. Next, and then I cut it, and now you can hardly see the joint at all, and I can cut right through the joint. The white line marks the joint, and you can see that you can't see at all, and I can cut right through the joint. And that solved my problem. Next. So now that I've got the joints cut, laid out, I chopped the whole board into sections, making it easier to cut with. And I cut off the top, I cut a small piece off on the other side to start with, and now I just have 100 pieces to cut. Next, and I cut each one of those small squares into strips. Next, and each one of those strips into small pieces until I have a whole bunch of pieces. Next, and so this is just a picture of me cutting all the pieces. I don't use a magnifying glass, I just cut by hand. Next, this is another piece of, you can see the table. This blows the sawdust away from where I'm cutting, so it doesn't get on the puzzle. Next. So this is what a piece would look like from the 100,000 piece puzzle, just painted, all lined out and just painted. Next. Next. And this is the same piece puzzled, and you can see the top edge is puzzled, the sides are puzzled, and the bottom is straight. Next. So from there on in, it was just a matter of making more and more 1 foot puzzles and connectors and putting them together. This is about halfway done, wrapped around a 6-inch PVC pipe with a little bit of walnut veneer around the edge. So now my diameters are smaller. My puzzle is a foot tall, and I'm just moving right along. Next. So this is what it looks like when I finished. I named it Magnum Opus, which means it's an artist's greatest work. And because it took me about 30 years in development, I consider it my greatest work. It took me between 3,600 and 4,300 hours to make. Each panel takes about 50 to 60 hours in the painting and cutting and finishing of the puzzle. Some of them are more complicated. This takes me a lot longer to paint over here than this nice little rainbow over here. So it kind of varied, but it took me about 20 years in development to figure this out. I put it on a Lazy Susan bottom and put a top on it so it wouldn't slide up. Next. And this got me noticed. This is the Game and Puzzle Quarterly, They are a big deal in the Jigsaw puzzle area, and he was nice enough to put me on the front page. Next. And I got another one in the Scroll Saw magazine, which was really nice. Next. And I got a Guinness certificate because Abby Taylor of Guinness saw my puzzle in the Jigsaw magazine. And she's in England. And she looked at the magazine and she talked to some people over there and she emailed me and she said, you know, I really like this. She said, are you really the artist? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? And so about a month later, numerous emails, numerous pictures, numerous discussions, we got a Guinness certificate. She sent me a Guinness certificate. And I thought that was really cool. I really enjoyed that. And because I got a Guinness certificate, Karen noticed me. And when she did, she invited me to this conference. And because I live so close, about 5 hours south of here, I said yes. She said, will you talk about it? I said, I love talking about my puzzle. I'll talk about my puzzle all day long. Not real good at public speaking, but I'll tell you all about my puzzle. So here I am, my puzzle. I have a booth behind this. The puzzle is behind this. I have a booth with little pictures, lots of ideas, lots of designs. And next. So this is the end. This is how my puzzle came out. And I'm happy to be here. And are there any questions?